Hello and welcome back. I'm Patrick Jaguar, the Cosmic Alchemist, and happy Ostara. So Ostara is a Germanic goddess, goddess of spring, goddess of the dawn, of the east, resurrection, and rebirth. So Ostara is more of it's kind of a modern pronunciation. Really, the the old Anglo-Saxon pronunciation was Eostre, or even Eostre. So you take Eostre, you have Easter, and in the old days, the word for the first solar month of the year, the first month of the spring, was Eostremonath or Eostremonath. So it meant Easter month. So most people, if you mention Easter, they think of the rebirth of Jesus and, the whole 3 days in the tomb and that whole bit. Well, Easter predates Jesus by a long shot, and really, Easter was an appropriated holiday. So as the Christianity spread, as the Roman Empire spread Christianity, and then once Christianity became an empire and really a kind of a business, a money-making enterprise in its own right, they spread out and they found that they just couldn't eliminate certain traditions and certain words and certain holidays. People would not give them up, no matter how many people they killed, how many people they re-educated. No matter how much they did that, they just couldn't get rid of certain words, traditions, and holidays. So they appropriated Easter just to sort of get people to go along with things. Bit of a compromise. They were still sort of reshaping Europe with an iron fist and, really killing the native cultures, but there were some things they just couldn't get rid of, and it's just like how the communists in China couldn't get rid of acupuncture and qigong, Chinese herbal medicine. They couldn't, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't get rid of the native traditions. And really, incidentally, in China, they tried to do that. They wanted to have Western medicine, and they wanted to erase the entire past and just, have a total modern, secular, scientific, intellectual kind of a society. But didn't work out. They actually ran out of money, and really they couldn't get the people to leave it behind. So same thing happened in Europe when the Christians came in and wanted to just erase the entire past. So really it's an interesting thing. Just incidentally, the Christians and the Muslims, between all the jihads and crusades and the inquisitions, the monotheism, but particularly Christianity and Islam, they basically gave the communists their playbook. The communists used the monotheist playbook and the monotheist tactics that the Muslims and the Christians used to try to eradicate native traditions wherever they spread out. You even see this with Islam, where they couldn't eradicate the native traditions in Iran, and they still have Zoroastrianism, for example, which is, it's a dwindling religion, but it's still there. They still have their temples and everything. So, same thing happened in Europe. So, and thank God it didn't die out, because there's a lot of rich tradition here. And, I like to make these videos because I believe that really going back to our roots is what will heal the world, particularly the Western world, the modern Western world, because the Western world has had a leg up on the rest of the world as far as hurting the environment, exploiting the environment, and just going all over the world and imposing their ways on it. So my solution to this is to go back to our roots. And it's, it's not just colored people who have, native shamanistic, earth-based traditions and spirituality. It's, even white people have it too. And, so that's where I come from. And I like to share the traditions and share the old beliefs. And hopefully this does something to kind of renew the world, really. So, and speaking of renewal, let's get back to Ostara, or Eostre. So, goddess of spring, the dawn, the east. The east is where the sun rises, obviously, and resurrection and rebirth. So again, her month, Easter month, was Eostremonath. So Ostara is, or Eostre is, the maiden aspect of the threefold goddess, and all over the world, the goddess. There was sort of, people believe that there was sort of one goddess, but all the other goddesses were different aspects of her. So Ostara is the maiden aspect. So when I say maiden, it's a woman who's able to bear children but not yet a mother. And then the other two aspects are the mother and the crone. So a mature mother, and then an older woman who's past those years, past those childbearing years. So, and what unifies all of these goddess traditions, this maiden aspect of the goddess traditions around the world, is that they're all set to the Pisces new moon. So, all of the spring traditions they're based on the Pisces new moon. So Pisces is the 12th sign of the zodiac. So when you have that new moon, it restarts the year. And this always happens, it's the 3rd, 4th week of March, maybe the 1st week of April. I was actually born on a Pisces new moon in April, back in the 80s. So there's kind of some wiggle room in there, but the equinox is a solar event, and then the Pisces new moon obviously is lunar. So sometimes they sync up really well, sometimes not so much. This year, 2020, Pisces new moon will be on the 24th of March. So actually tomorrow, from when I'm making this video. So, some really interesting little things here. The Brothers Grimm, particularly Jacob Grimm, who recorded all of these Indo-European fairy tales that were common in Germany in his time in the 1800s. He recorded a lot about the folk traditions around Ostara, or around Eostre. And Ostara, Eostre, was also a goddess of sacred springs, and what they would do was, especially young women, but just anybody would do this, they would go out and gather water from streams and sacred springs at this time, and washing with this water was said to restore youth. They would also do this with dew, that can be gathered from grass and vegetation, things like that. It was also tradition where you would see, maidens, young women, traveling through the countryside or riding through the countryside with, kind of sheer white garments. So it was, the white garments was a symbol of this rebirth, and this, this kind of cleansing that had gone on with nature. Because, when you live in cold climates, we have snow and ice. Snow and ice is seen as a cleansing agent. So after the snows and the ice of winter, the environment is basically cleansed and a whole new cycle begins. So, definitely a lot of kind of speculation and sort of circumstantial evidence around, the origins of Ostara, because not a lot was written down. Most of this was oral tradition. So when you look through, academia, through the anthropology, through the history, most academics will say that, well, we don't know that Ostara was really a goddess. We don't even know if people really worshipped her, because there weren't a lot of written records of this. Really the the only written records came from Christian monks who were definitely paganophobes, and the Christian monks really went off on a very vehement and a very long campaign to demonize paganism. And so that's where the modern beliefs, and the evil of paganism come from. A lot of people still in the world today, when you mention paganism, they think it involves all kinds of crazy evil activity and sacrifices, and there's just, even if they don't believe that, they think there's something taboo. If you mention paganism, or if you tell people you're a pagan, then they kind of get this reaction, and they think that they're, it's going to anger the Jehovah up on a cloud, but that's centuries and centuries of basically mind control and browbeating. So the church, all churches have always been basically commercial enterprises. They bring money in, and there's a lot of incentive to bring money in, and they're kind of an empire in their own right. And really, after the fall of the Roman Empire, what I see is the rise of the Christian empire. And in my opinion, really the Christian empire continued, up to the 20th century, and it was continually trying to expand, and it did a lot to erase native traditions, and and punish people severely when they could get away with it for not abandoning native traditions, all over the world. This was done in North America, to the natives here, Africa, Asia, Australia, the whole bit. But they learned how to do it first in Europe. So really, really interesting, story behind the whole thing. And as far as the Eostremonath, the Easter month, that was basically the predominant name for the month of April up until the 8th century, and it was actually 8th, 9th century, and it was actually Charlemagne who, in the parts of Germany that his empire had conquered, and even in his own Frankish kingdom, which we now call France, he had the name of Eostremonath changed to April. So April was a Roman Latin month. So and Charlemagne was really a strong promoter of this this Roman Christian empire, and he committed holocausts in his own right to promote this Roman Christianity. So it's a miracle that these traditions survived, but thank God, thank the gods they did. So some other, getting back to Ostara, some other speculation is that Ostara is really another face of maybe Freya, or Freya is a goddess of the rebirth of nature, goddess of Kundalini energy, sexual energy. Iduna is another Germanic goddess of kind of vegetation, the bounty of the earth, and then Valberga, which is kind of more of a continental German face of Iduna. Iduna is more of a Scandinavian name for the same goddess. So you can make the case for these. There's no documented connection, but you can definitely see why, if you look into it, why people would make these associations. I think Ostara, Eostre, is a goddess in her own right. There's so many hundreds of goddesses, you really don't have to say, well, this is really this and this is really this, because there are as many gods and goddesses as people need. We sort of they're basically forces of nature, and we give them names, and we sort of give them a personality. They exist in their own right, but we basically, every god, goddess that ever lived was kind of invented by us in a way. They were definitely forces in their own right, but we gave them names and personalities to basically to interface with them. They're sort of public utilities in a way. So anyway, and I would say, if you wanted to categorize Ostara or Eostre, I think she would definitely fall into the Vanir category, because she clearly is a goddess of nature, a goddess of the earth rather than a celestial, like the Asir or the Aesir. So some symbols for Ostara. One of the most popular that we still have, again something that the church couldn't get rid of, was the colored eggs. So and the reason for colored eggs at Easter is because March and April is actually the peak egg laying time for chickens. Because animals like to, wild animals like to have their babies right in the spring, so they have the whole summer and fall to grow up and fatten up and mature during, so they'll survive the next winter. And this natural timing was very fortuitous, very opportune for our ancestors in Europe, because they had all these eggs, all these chicken eggs, to help rejuvenate them and nourish them after the the food scarcity of winter. People would try to store as much food as possible during winter and go hunt and gather what they could. But if your stores ran short, or they didn't really great in the fall, then you could be pretty hungry through the winter. So the eggs were really it was the first abundant food supply, right when the spring equinox came. So pretty neat symbol. And then too, you had the symbol of the hare. So the Easter bunny, hares, rabbits are very prolific in reproducing. They have big litters of little bunnies. And serpents were another important symbol. And serpents represent the Kundalini energy that rises up the spine. And Kundalini energy is there's different aspects to it. In one sense, it's sexual energy, and it's also basically the energy of your personality that makes you unique, gives you unique personality. And Kundalini energy really too is also it's all about your level of emotional and psychological maturity. That's what Kundalini rising really is. It's about which of these centers, these chakras, can you interface with the world from. So it's not about crazy experiences, almost like doing psychedelics. It's not about being able to last 4 or 5 hours in bed, and all these crazy things that are associated with Kundalini yoga and working with Kundalini. It's really about your psychological and emotional maturity. So anyway, and another little interesting thing too is if you get into the realm of conspiracy theory at all, about the skull and bones, and the skull and bones associated with their symbol, they have this number 322. And 322 is March 22nd, so it's the day after the equinox, or some years it's the day of the equinox. So this is when the sun again returns from the southern hemisphere. It passes over. It's the day of, or the day after the Passover, and it brings the sun back to the northern hemisphere, and then summer can return, and we can have a whole new growing season and a whole new harvest after that. So Skull and Bones was still is, it's a German chapter, a German order of Freemasonry. So, and really the original purpose of Freemasonry was to preserve the the old Germanic pagan, and then Celtic pagan Druidic traditions. I think it was eventually corrupted. Even it was the Duke of Brunswick who was the head of German Freemasonry at the end of the 1700s. He said that the order needed to be basically disbanded because people with the wrong intentions had infiltrated the order, and they were They were recruiting within it so that they could advance their own, financial and political interests. So, nothing evil about 322. It's March 22nd. It's the return of the light, and there's nobody in the world that doesn't love the sun or warm weather or the spring. So that's all about. And then, another interesting kind of topic I wanted to get to here is, how Easter was turned into a male-centric holiday, basically. So how was Easter, masculinized? How was it made male? So before Jesus, because clearly Jesus became the male face of Easter. The cult of Jesus appropriated Easter. So, but before Jesus, you had Attis, and Attis was a Greek and a Phrygian god, and the Romans, especially starting like the 1st century, AD, CE, whatever you like to say, in that 1st century, the Romans, it became really fashionable to take on, goddesses and gods and, spiritual ceremonies and rites from different parts of their empire. So, Phrygia was in central modern-day Turkey, and, Attis was a vegetation god, basically. So, a god of the bounty of the earth, and he was actually, he was the son and the consort of Sibyl or Cybele, and the Sibylline oracles were pretty well known in the ancient world. They were consulted whenever leaders wanted to make important decisions. So Cybele had the priestesses who were the oracles that attended her, and then Attis was again the virgin-born son of Cybele, who was actually born on December 25th, as odds would have it. And Attis was attended by a group of eunuch priests called the Galley priests. So, this is why, incidentally, this is why, they talk about Jesus' followers being Galileans. Well, archaeology has shown, and even Roman record keeping has shown that, Galilee wasn't even in existence till 200 or 300 AD. But what you had around the time, there's Odin. What you had around that time when the biblical Jesus was said to have lived was the Galley priests. You had the Galley priesthood all over the Roman Empire. So really, and in kind of this in this Christian kind of Reconstructionism, where people acknowledge Mary Magdalene, and like you can't say Jesus, you have to call him Yeshua, that kind of thing. I think there were likely some historical figures who actually lived, but I don't think they were miracle workers or sort of super divine humans. I think they were royals who were laying claim to the thrones of Judea, the throne of old Iran, throne of Egypt, and even the throne of the Roman Empire. That's who I think they were. But these historical Jesus and Mary figures, they were, on top of being royals, they were most likely part of these cults in the Roman Empire. These Roman, Egyptian, and kind of Greek cults. So, as a couple, especially if they worked their way up in these orders, they would have symbolically been, the pairing of Attis and Cybele. So the mother and son, consort kind of, husband and wife kind of thing. And really, when you look at this kind of Christian reconstruction, you could even argue that, Mary Magdalene really has the, kind of the higher status, and that would definitely have been true, when you put Attis and Cybele next to each other. So, kind of an interesting historical thing there. But all these things contribute to how Easter was appropriated and made made male. The other thing too was when the Romans were once they finally allowed Christianity to become a thing, they wanted to keep Christians and the Roman pagans happy, so they started blending all this stuff together. So I think Easter is definitely not Jesus' holiday, and but that's how they did it. Definitely very separate things. Interesting thing though is that if you look at Jesus as a sun god, then I can definitely see how he pertains to Easter. And just kind of a last sidebar, that's an interesting thing for me about the role of kind of Jesus in the life of Christians, because really any mythological Jesus, the sun god Jesus, is much more powerful than any person who actually lived, because I think kind of Christians really do a disservice to Jesus when they try to when if people comment that there are hardly any records of this person living and he probably wasn't really a real person, they get very defensive, and they talk about how the Bible is the revealed true word and all this stuff. Well, if you reduce Jesus to being a human that lived, then he's no better than modern religious leaders and religious leaders throughout time. And religious leaders throughout time there've been a lot of really greedy, money hungry religious leaders, and kind of perverts, people who were sexually molesting their followers and milking money out of them and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But the mythological Jesus is really infinitely powerful. It's like Thor or Odin or any of those gods and goddesses. The mythological versions of them are just, they're in a way they're above human. They're kind of above human behavior. At the same time, in the myths though, they do a lot of very human things. But I guess my point is when you have a book that you have to believe is a literal revelation, you have to believe that the people who are talked about in this literal revelation were almost perfect, or at least perfect enough to your liking. So yeah, it really cuts the legs off Jesus, but I mean, I'm not really into him personally, but it's kind of an observation. So that's kind of my take on Ostara here and the Feast of Ostara. So happy Ostara, and have a good spring, and a little tie-in with the astrology here. Like I've been saying, we have on March 28th, all the way through the month of August, we have Venus in its home sign of Taurus for that whole 5 months, almost 5 months. So this is going to bring a lot of healing and renewal and restoration, and even kind of patching over of different kinds of relationships, and just sort of goodwill between people. So this will be a good year for for this goddess of renewal. So again, happy Ostara, happy spring, and it's going to help a lot with this whole coronavirus situation too. So thanks for tuning in. Talk to you later.